They thought he was just a medic, quiet, steady, always there when the bleeding wouldn't stop. But what no one in Echo Company knew was that Staff Sergeant Nathan Hale carried a second name, one whispered only in the darkest corners of Black Ops briefings: Reaper. He was the man who walked through fire and returned without a scratch, the ghost who turned battlefields into graveyards. And when Operation Red Sky collapsed into chaos, the soldiers finally saw the truth. Hale wasn't there just to save lives. He was there to end wars. They never expected the medic to walk off the battlefield alive. Not because he was weak or untrained. Far from it. Staff Sergeant Nathan Hale had seen more blood than half the battalion put together. But in a unit of warriors, gunners, snipers, and explosive experts, a medic was always in the wrong place at the worst time. He ran toward what others fled from. He stayed low, stayed quiet, stayed invisible, and because he always made it back, people stopped asking how. They knew his name, they knew his rank, they called him Doc, or Sawbones, or just Hale, but they didn't really know him. Not the man beneath the bloodied gloves and stoic silence, not the shadow that followed him, the one only whispered about in the hush of midnight watch rotations when adrenaline finally wore off and the bravado faded with the moonlight. What they didn't know, what no one knew, was that Staff Sergeant Hale wasn't just a medic, he was Reaper. It started years ago, in the poppy-drenched valleys of Kandahar, back when the war was a never-ending cycle of raids, IEDs, and silence punctuated by hell. Hale was a field medic then, barely 22, fresh-faced and haunted by the screams of the first man he'd lost. His CO at the time, Captain Marsh, had told him, "You do your job too well. Save one too many, and they'll start asking you to play God." And Marsh was right, because it wasn't long before Hale realized that sometimes saving someone wasn't about stopping the bleeding or restarting a heart. Sometimes it meant picking up the rifle from a fallen brother and doing the kind of work that didn't earn medals, just nightmares. He never told anyone about that night in Nuristan, the ambush, the 3-hour firefight, the way he'd crawled through barbed wire and broken bodies to reach Lieutenant Ramos, only to find the man already dead. He could have turned back. He should have. But instead he'd picked up Ramos's weapon and eliminated every hostile between himself and the evac point. 17 confirmed kills, 0 witnesses. By morning, Hale was back with the others, bloodied, limping, and quiet as ever. The brass never asked questions, just handed him a new patch, transferred him to a Black Ops unit, and gave him a new name for the missions that didn't exist on paper. Reaper. For 3 years, Hale disappeared from the rosters of every division he'd served in. No one talked about it, and the few who did were either too high-ranking or too dead to explain it. Then one day, he reappeared, back in uniform, back with a standard name tag. No one mentioned the gap, and Hale didn't offer. That's how he ended up in Echo Company, one of the most hardened battalions in the Army, serving under General Marcus Temple, a man known for fighting like a warhound and leading with an iron will. The general had seen everything: Vietnam, Desert Storm, both Iraq tours. He was a relic and a beast, the kind of leader soldiers would follow into the gates of hell. But even he didn't know who Hale really was. No one did. To them, Hale was just the medic, the quiet one with eyes that never blinked, hands that never shook, and a bag of supplies that never seemed to run out. He patched holes, reset bones, stitched lacerations with the ease of a tailor on autopilot. He moved with calm precision, like war didn't touch him, like he'd already made peace with death and didn't bother arguing with it anymore. Then came Red Sky. Operation Red Sky wasn't in the news. It wasn't in the intel briefing sent to the Pentagon. It wasn't anything at all, officially. It was one of those black ops operations that even the generals whispered about. A ghost mission, deep in an Eastern European mountain range, too close to Russian airspace for comfort, too far from NATO supply lines for support. The target? A rogue private military compound believed to be developing illegal AI-driven weapon systems. Command wanted the entire facility wiped. No survivors, no data leaks, no evidence, just ash. Echo Company was deployed in the dead of night, fast-roped from Blackhawks onto a frozen ridge just outside the valley. General Temple was on the ground. That never happened. The man was too important to risk boots-down presence, but something about Red Sky had gotten personal. He never said why, but he was there, leading from the front, as always. The first day went to plan: infiltration, recon, silent eliminations. The perimeter was tight, the guards sloppy, and morale high. Day 2 went sideways. An explosion rocked the eastern sector at 300. No one saw it coming. The heat wave melted the snow midwinter. Half the squad was down before they could scream. Echo Company scattered. The base had drones, new ones, fast ones, with facial recognition and smart rounds. One of them took out Lieutenant Granger while he was mid-step. Another fried the comms before anyone could call for evac. It was hell. Pure, snow-flecked, tech-augmented hell. But through it all, Hale moved. He pulled Captain Reese out of the crater, set PFC Nguyen's shoulder with one hand while shooting a drone out of the sky with the other, dragged Sergeant Keller a mile and a half through sniper fire, then performed a full thoracotomy in the snow. No cover, no support, no hesitation. And that was when they started noticed that Hale never panicked, never swore, never missed. Not with a tourniquet, not with a rifle. They started watching him differently, like maybe Doc wasn't the full story. By day 4, half the company was gone. Reinforcements weren't coming. The drones were learning, adapting. The AI systems in the compound were rewriting their code mid-battle, reacting faster than any human could track. General Temple called a war room under a collapsed cave ledge. Frostbitten faces, empty eyes, bleeding fingers. They all looked to the general, and he looked to Hale. Not Reese, not the tech officer, not even the sniper. Hale. He didn't say much, just studied the map with those quiet, storm-gray eyes. Then, for the first time anyone could remember, he spoke in a tone that cut through the chaos like a scalpel. "You need to let me off-leash." Temple narrowed his eyes. "Say that again? You heard me? You're a medic?" "I'm more than that, you know it. Let me off-leash, sir." It was the pause that said it all. The way Temple hesitated, then finally nodded, like he'd just remembered something he was never supposed to. "All right," the general said. "Permission granted. Reaper." The room went silent, not from confusion, from recognition, because that name, Reaper, wasn't unknown. It was whispered in black site bunkers and CIA basements. The boogeyman of the battlefield, the specter who cleaned up messes no one talked about, the medic who bled ghosts. And now he stood right in front of them. Reaper. No one said anything. Not even Keller, who usually had something to say about everything. They just watched as Hale stood up, rolled his sleeves back, and dropped the medic bag. Then picked up the custom rifle that had been stashed in a waterproof case no one had ever seen him touch. Matte black, short barrel, fingerprint locked. Its name stenciled faintly near the trigger. Harrow. Hale turned to Temple. "Give me 12 hours. "Make it back," the general said, "or we all die." "I don't miss," Hale replied. And he didn't. He didn't miss the first drone that swept the ravine, took it down with a single armor-piercing round to the undercarriage, didn't miss the sentry who tried to radio out for help, didn't miss the patrols, the snipers, the infrared traps, or the dogged remains of a private army more expensive than any nation's. He moved like death incarnate, silent, efficient, unstoppable. And when he reached the AI core, deep in the belly of the mountain compound, he didn't plant C4 like a grunt. He rewrote its code by hand, shut it down with a sequence no one else could have known, And then he came back, at exactly hour 12, bleeding from the shoulder, calm as ever. Temple was the only one who met his eyes when he returned. "How bad?" the general asked. "Burned the servers, flattened the drones, tagged the ones I didn't have time to kill with nano-beacons. Your birds can mop up the rest." Temple nodded. Then he collapsed. Just like that. Mid-nod, eyes rolling back, mouth slack, body crumpling like his bones had given up. The medics rushed to him, but Hale didn't move. Didn't blink. He knew. Just from the way Temple's hand twitched, fingers curling toward his side, like he was reaching for something that wasn't there. Hale knelt beside him, took the general's hand. Temple's lips moved, barely audible. Only Hale heard. "Call Reaper," the general whispered. "Next time, too." And then he died. They buried him with full honors. Salutes, taps of flag folded with reverence and tears. But no one ever knew the full story. No one knew what he'd whispered in those final seconds. Except Hale, who stood alone at the grave, hands behind his back, expression unreadable. He stayed after everyone else left, stayed until the wind was the only sound, and the sun dipped behind the mountains like a curtain closing on the last scene. Then he reached into his coat, pulled out the Harrow rifle, and walked away. Because somewhere out there war was waiting, and next time they'd call Reaper first. 3 weeks passed. Echo Company returned home fractured, not in number, they'd lost 14, but in understanding. The mission had technically been a success, the compound destroyed, the AI eliminated, and no evidence left behind. But the man they brought back wasn't quite the same one they deployed with. Nathan Hale, or rather Reaper, was quieter now. Not just in voice, but in presence. He moved through the base like a ghost, untouched by the noise and chaos that had always surrounded post-mission decompression. The younger soldiers cracked beers and played cards, trying to drown the nightmares in laughter. Hale didn't join them. He never did. His uniform bore the same stripes. His records still listed him as a medic. But in the weeks following General Temple's death, whispers grew. Rumors turned to half-truths. Men who'd seen him in the red sky aftermath swore he'd walked through fire. Others claimed drones avoided him, like they recognized something more dangerous than themselves. They didn't call him Doc anymore. They called him Sir. Even the officers. When the Army finally reached out to conduct the debrief, they sent someone from Langley. A woman in a clean black suit, clipboard in hand, eyes like razors. She didn't knock when she entered Hale's quarters. She just opened the door and shut it behind her without a word. Hale was sitting at the edge of his bunk, tying his boots. "You weren't cleared for field command," she said flatly. "I didn't take command," Hale replied. "General Temple gave you operational control. I didn't ask him to. He died 2 hours after doing so. I didn't ask for that either." She studied him for a long moment. "You reactivated the Reaper protocol without clearance. It was the only way to save what was left of Echo. And now, half the Pentagon wants to shut it down permanently." Hale stood, slowly. He wasn't a tall man, but he had presence, gravity, a kind of coiled control that made people stop talking when he turned to look at them. "Do they want to shut down Reaper?" he asked. "Or just forget they ever needed him?" The woman didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her briefcase and pulled out a folder, thick, stamped with enough red tape to strangle a general. "New orders," she said. Hale didn't take the folder, just looked at it. "They're not from the Army," he said. "No, they're from above." "How far above?" She met his gaze. "Higher than you've ever been." A beat passed. Then Hale nodded once. The next time he deployed, there was no send-off. No brothers in arms, no shoulder claps or half-joking goodbyes. He left in silence, driven in an unmarked SUV to an airstrip that didn't exist on any map. He boarded a jet with no tail number. There were no flight attendants, no manifest. Just a single chair, a crate of weapons, and a sealed case marked with his name. Inside the case, a headset, a watch, and a coin. The coin was old, burnished brass. One side was stamped with an eagle and a Latin phrase Hale didn't bother translating. The other bore only a single word. Reaper. No rank, no branch, no nation, just the call sign. He flipped it once, caught it, pocketed it, then closed his eyes and leaned back in the seat, listening to the low hum of the engines as the jet climbed into the sky. His next deployment wasn't a war zone, not at first glance. It was a city, clean, bustling, modern, a European capital full of politicians, bankers, and diplomats who smiled too wide and walked too fast. But beneath the marble buildings and red carpet ceremonies, something darker pulsed. The intel was vague, murky, but the mission brief, once he read it, was clear. Find the threat, eliminate the source, disappear. His only contact, a local intelligence handler known only as Vika. She met him in the cellar of an old jazz club on the river's edge. The club was closed for renovations, the windows blacked out, the alley guarded by two ex-Spetsnaz who said nothing and watched everything. Vika was already pouring whiskey when he entered. "You're late," she said. "I'm never late," Hale replied. "Then time must move differently around you." He didn't smile. She didn't expect him to. Vika slid a dossier across the table. It was thinner than he liked. Thin usually meant guesses instead of facts. "We've lost 3 agents in the last 9 days," she said. "All on surveillance, all tracking the same man." She flipped open the folder. The photo inside showed a pale, clean-cut man with the bland handsomeness of someone who didn't want to be remembered, the kind of face that melted into crowds, that disappeared by design. "Dr. Matthias Kerr," Vika said. "Biotech prodigy, Swiss credentials, Russian funding, American contracts. Triple agent? More like triple opportunist. What's he building?" Vika paused. "Reapers." Hale blinked, once, then leaned forward. "Explain." Vika reached under the table and produced a tablet. She tapped it, revealing footage. Grainy, low-light security cam video showing a man walking into a crowded subway, then dropping to the floor, then convulsing, and then exploding, not in the fiery bomb blast sense, but in silence. His body twisted violently, his limbs tearing themselves apart, skin cracking like overripe fruit. Then something emerged, something that didn't look quite human. The footage cut to black. "Biological sleeper agents," Vika said. "Grown, programmed, activated remotely, designed to destroy not with bombs but contagion, nanite-planted viral carriers, programmable flesh." Hale said nothing. Vika poured him a second glass. "We need you to end the project, whatever it takes. And Kerr? Terminate. Collateral? As needed." Hale finished the whiskey, then stood, and disappeared. He found Kerr's first lab in an abandoned factory outside the city, hidden behind a shell corporation that supposedly imported antique furniture. Hale slipped in under moonlight, his movements silent and surgical. The lab was cold, metallic, clinical in the way nightmares often are. He moved through it methodically, found rows of pods, like sarcophagi, glass caskets filled with not-yet-human things suspended in amber light. He destroyed them all: fire, acid, grenades. When he emerged, the factory was ash, but Kerr was already gone. One step ahead, always. The next lead came from a banker who'd laundered research funds through 5 shell companies. Hale found him in a penthouse, flanked by 2 security guards and a mistress half his age. 10 minutes later, the guards were unconscious. The girl had run screaming, and the banker was dangling from the balcony, Hale's fist wrapped in his lapel. "Where's Kerr?" "I don't know," the banker sobbed. "I never met him. I only moved the—" The grip tightened. Okay. There's a lab. Under the river, abandoned tunnels. He moves every few weeks." Hale dropped him. Not off the balcony, just onto the floor. The man whimpered, but Hale was already gone. The tunnels were worse than the factory. Worse because they weren't abandoned. They were full. people. Tech. Machines that breathed and pulsed and clicked like they were waiting to wake up. He moved like a wraith through the darkness, slipped past guards, disabled cameras, and planted silent charges at every structural weak point. Then found CARE's operating theater. It was glass-walled, suspended above a pool of glowing green fluid that pulsed like a heartbeat. Inside the room, CARE stood in front of a table. A child was on it. 10 years old, strapped down, eyes wide. "You're late," CARE said without turning around. "I'm never late," Hale replied from the shadows. CARE smiled. "You know they told me about you, the ghost medic, the death dealer with a conscience, the Reaper." He turned. His eyes gleamed. "Do you know why I used that name, Reaper? Because it's poetic. It's evolution. You reap the weak, I create the strong." Hale stepped into the light, his weapon raised. CARE didn't flinch. "You won't shoot," he said. "Not while she's still alive." "You sure?" "She's not done. Not yet. One wrong move, and every nerve in her body snaps like a puppet string." "I don't miss," Hale said again, and fired. One shot, straight through CARE's shoulder. The man screamed and dropped. Hale crossed the distance in seconds, disabling the restraints, lifting the girl into his arms. "Close your eyes," he told her. She did. He activated the charges. The lab collapsed behind him as he climbed out of the tunnels, fire licking at his heels, CARE's scream swallowed by the explosion. By dawn there was nothing left. Nothing but a crater and a name. Reaper. 2 weeks after the tunnel burned, Hale sat alone in a hotel room overlooking a war memorial in central Berlin. He hadn't slept, not because of nightmares, those stopped bothering him years ago, but because of the girl, the one he'd carried out of that lab, the one CARE had nearly finished turning into something no longer human. Her name was Mila. She didn't speak much, didn't cry, but she stayed close, too close. Like her mind had been hardwired to recognize Hale as the only constant in a world that had tried to erase her. And that's exactly what they wanted, the brass, the people above Langley, the ones who wrote orders in ink that couldn't be traced. They wanted to debrief her, study her, contain her. Hale didn't need to ask what that meant. He'd seen too many black site hospitals with white walls and no windows, so he kept her off-grid. Vika helped, falsified her death in the tunnel collapse, rewrote her data trail, provided a new name, fake guardians, a safe house. "I owe you nothing," she'd told Hale, "but I owe her a life." The night Mila left, she hugged him once, tight, like she was afraid he'd vanish if she let go. He didn't say goodbye. He just placed the coin, the Reaper coin, in her pocket. "You ever need me," he said quietly, "use that." Then she was gone. Hale didn't return to Echo Company. There was no unit left. Most had rotated out or been reassigned after Red Sky. A few never came home. Some had turned civilian. Others stayed in, chasing the rank that never really mattered in the end. He spent time in between, in the shadows of missions that never happened. He dismantled a rogue cyber warfare satellite in Argentina, infiltrated a stolen nuclear sub run by mercs off the coast of Indonesia, neutralized a hostile AI embedded in the Tokyo financial network. But none of it touched him, not really, until Syria, until the outpost at Asher Base went silent. It started as a routine supply run gone dark. Then the forward team sent to investigate never reported back. That's when Command called in a rapid response recon team. What they found wasn't a base anymore. It was a massacre. No bullet wounds, no signs of artillery or explosives, just rows of bodies, bloodless, twisted, eyes wide and staring, mouths frozen mid-scream. And one word etched into the concrete wall of the main barracks in what appeared to be ash. Reaper. Except Hale hadn't been there. Hadn't been anywhere near Syria, but the name spread like wildfire through every secure channel. Panic bloomed behind desks and keyboards. A shadow of the past resurrected in all the wrong ways. That's when Command did something they'd only ever done once before. They called Reaper. Hale landed in the middle of the night. No lights, no welcoming committee, just a sealed envelope, a satellite phone, and a single phrase on the note inside: "Finish what we started." He knew what that meant. He didn't want to believe it, but he knew. Care wasn't dead. The body in the tunnel had been a decoy, a cleverly crafted clone. The real Care had escaped, just like he always planned. And now he was using Hale's name, his legend, his fear, to wage a war without ever raising a flag. Hale moved through the wreckage of Asher Base with surgical detachment, identified signs the recon team had missed: traces of synthetic blood, implant residue, neuropod rupture. This wasn't a chemical weapon. It was worse. This was evolution, weaponized. Care had cracked it. He was making Reapers of his own. The chase took weeks. From Syria to Sudan, through dead drops and shattered labs and intel caches burned seconds before arrival. Hale followed the trail like a surgeon tracing infection through muscle. Always one step behind, until Moldova, until the safe house, until the boy. He was barely 12, cuffed to a radiator in the back room of an old farmhouse, eyes blank, skin pale, veins black. He spoke a single phrase when Hale entered, flat, robotic, like it had been programmed. "You are obsolete." Then he lunged, faster than anything should move. Hale dodged, tackled him, pinned him. No heartbeat, no sweat. The kid wasn't human, not fully, not anymore. He had one of Care's spinal implants. Prototype version, exposed wiring. Hale used a combat knife to sever it. The boy went still, just like that. Then the satellite phone rang. Hale answered. He already knew who it was. "I told you," Care said, his voice like a smile carved in glass. "I would make better Reapers." Hale didn't respond. Care continued. "You were the prototype, the failed proof of concept, all that efficiency, and still so slow to evolve." "I'm coming," Hale said. "I know. That's the fun part." Click. The final showdown came 3 days later. An island, uncharted, hidden in the Baltic Sea off every naval map. It wasn't a base, it was a cathedral, all steel and glass and monstrous ambition. The inside pulsed with humming energy, veins of light running through the floors like the place was alive. It was a temple to artificial perfection, and Hale walked in alone, not because he had to, because he wanted to. Care was waiting in the central chamber. He looked unchanged, impossibly calm. "You're late." Hale said nothing. He took in the lab, the pods, the humming core behind Care, glowing brighter than a reactor. It looked like a sun trapped inside a glass cage. "You can't stop it," Care said. "They're already awake." Hale fired. 2 shots. Care staggered, clutching his side. "Still so predictable," the doctor gasped. Hale advanced, dodging the first wave of defense drones with inhuman grace. Destroyed them with surgical precision. His weapon clicked empty. He dropped it, switched to blades. The fight was brutal. Care was faster than a man should be, augmented, but not invincible. Hale broke his jaw with a single punch. "Why?" Hale demanded. Care bled, smiled. "Because Reapers aren't born," he whispered. "They're made." Hale didn't wait for the speech to end. He drove the blade into Care's chest, straight through the core implant. The light in the room flickered, then dimmed. The facility collapsed around him. Hale moved through fire like it welcomed him. He dragged the last of the pods to the incinerator, made sure none of them would ever breathe, then walked out. Smoke on his boots, blood on his hands, silence in his ears. He made it to the extraction point with seconds to spare. The chopper lifted into the dawn sky. He didn't look back, not once. 2 days later, in a hidden base beneath Langley, a general looked over the report. "Care is dead?" "Yes," the analyst replied. "And the program?" "Destroyed." The general closed the file. And Reaper? The analyst hesitated. He didn't come back. The general raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? The analyst swallowed. We don't know where he is. The general was silent a moment, then smiled faintly. Good. Somewhere far away, a man sat alone in a quiet cabin overlooking a frozen lake. He wore no uniform, held no weapons, but he still carried the coin, and when he flipped it once just to hear the sound, it didn't fall. It landed in his palm, engraved, weathered, but unmistakable. Reaper. He closed his fist around it, because somewhere, one day, someone would whisper his name again, and when they did, he would answer. 2 days after Kerr's lab went dark, Hale found himself in an abandoned train yard on the outskirts of Prague. He wasn't following orders anymore. There were no more handlers, no more debriefs, no official channels. He moved like smoke now, silent and untraceable, bound not to a command but to something harder to kill, a promise. Kerr's death should have ended the war. But Hale knew better. The kind of men who build gods in basements and call them progress don't work alone. And Kerr hadn't built the Reapers, not entirely. Someone had given him the seed, the funding, the green light to play with evolution like it was a chessboard. Hale needed the source, and he had a name, just one, scribbled in blood across a strip of gauze wrapped around the final test subject's neck. Parallax. No first name, no nation, no known affiliations, just a ghost word passed between dying men and broken machines. Hale watched the train yard through a broken lens from a rooftop across the tracks. Below, 2 men paced near a rusted cargo car marked for decommissioning. One had a limp, the other had a nervous tic, glancing at his watch every 12 seconds. They weren't military, they were runners. Hale moved without noise, dropped from the roof, landed behind a stack of pallets, waited. When the man with the watch turned to light a cigarette, Hale stepped out of the dark and gripped his shoulder with one hand, the other already looping around to pin his wrist. The limp guy ran. Hale led him. He leaned in close to the one still squirming, speaking low. "Who's Parallax?" The man stammered. I don't know. Hale pressed harder. "You're not the first I've asked. You don't want to be the last." "Okay," the man gasped. "It's not a person. It's a facility. Deep freeze, off books, nobody goes in twice." "Where?" "It's not on a map. You need a key." "What kind of key?" The man opened his mouth, then his eyes widened. A dart hit his neck. Silent, precise. Hale spun, already dragging the man's body behind the pallets. On the ridge above the yard, a sniper repositioned. Hale spotted the glint, moved. By the time the second shot came, he was already scaling the rusted freight car, feet silent against the metal. He reached the roof and rolled just as the sniper fired again. The round clipped a shard of metal inches from his head. Hale popped up, fired once. The ridge went quiet. He made his way up the hill, found the shooter's body already cooling, civilian gear, professional build, and a keycard still warm in his pocket, black, unmarked, just a chip embedded in the center. Hale held it to the light. There was no writing, no code, just one symbol etched faintly on the edge. An hourglass. Parallax. He pocketed the card and disappeared. The next morning, Hale stood in front of an old radio tower 2 hours north of Warsaw. It wasn't broadcasting. It hadn't been in years. But the door at its base still scanned his keycard with a faint beep. The metal shutter groaned open. He stepped inside. Darkness swallowed him. Then lights flickered to life, one at a time, descending down a spiral staircase that didn't belong in any tower. The air was cold, sterile. He walked for 10 minutes before he reached the real entrance. A biometric scanner pulsed red beside a steel door the color of smoke. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a second card. This one was older, faded, marked with a single word, Echo. It had once belonged to General Temple. The system scanned it, paused. Then the door unlocked. What lay beyond wasn't a lab. It was a graveyard, rows of empty cryopods, deactivated terminals, dust-coated consoles. But Hale knew better than to assume dead things stayed dead. He moved slowly, watching, listening. Then he found it. A terminal still active, screen blinking softly. One prompt on the screen. Reaper detected. Initiate sequence? Hale hesitated, then typed, "No." The screen flashed. Override? He didn't respond. Instead, he opened the panel beneath the terminal and pulled the data drive. It was warm, recent. Someone had been here, or still was. He turned to leave, and froze. A figure stood in the hallway. Female, young, pale skin, long hair, eyes too bright. Mila. No, not Mila, but a copy, a match. Hale stepped forward slowly, gun lowered. "Who are you?" he asked. She tilted her head, smiled faintly. "You left me." His stomach twisted. The voice was identical. "You're not her." "No," she said softly, "but I remember you." "Where's the real Mila?" "Safe, for now. But they're looking." Hale raised the weapon. "Who's they?" "Parallax isn't a place," she said. "It's a test. And you passed." "I didn't take any test. You did the moment you spared me." Her eyes flickered. Not blinked. Flickered. Digital interference. She wasn't fully organic. "What do they want?" he asked. "What they've always wanted," she said. "The next war. The final war. A world run by the ones who can't feel. And what are you? I'm the warning." She stepped forward. "You won't stop them. You're already obsolete." Hale fired. Not to kill. To stall. The round hit the wall as she vanished, flickered out like a bad signal. He didn't chase. There was nothing to chase, just data. And a countdown he hadn't seen until now. The terminal behind him flashed red. Virus detected. Lockdown initiated. Hale grabbed the drive and sprinted. The facility began sealing behind him, doors closing like jaws. He cleared the stairs just as the first explosions rocked the tower from below. When he emerged into the forest, the ground trembled. The old radio tower collapsed in on itself with a groan that echoed like a warning. Hale didn't look back. He ran. Hale didn't stop running until the trees turned to frost, until the tower was a black smear in the distance and the smoke curled upward like a dying signal. He crouched beneath a frozen pine, pulled his jacket tighter, and inserted the data drive into a portable decryptor he hadn't used in years. It hummed. Lights blinked. Lines of code scrolled past the screen faster than human eyes could read, but Hale wasn't trying to read it. He was watching for patterns, repetition, language tucked inside language. Then it hit. A phrase embedded in the drive's architecture, hidden in the code of a surveillance video file. The timestamp was blank, the metadata scrubbed, but the words were clear. "Call Reaper." The same phrase Temple had whispered with his last breath. The same phrase now echoing back at him like an invitation, a warning, a trigger. The screen blinked again. Another message, this one encrypted, but the key was old, one of Temple's last. Hale entered the sequence from memory, 1404-1968, Temple's birthday. The message decrypted instantly. A grainy video feed loaded on screen. Static crackled for a moment, then resolved into the image of a man Hale hadn't seen in years. General Temple, pre-red sky, younger, stronger, but still bearing the weight of too many lost years in his eyes. "If you're seeing this," Temple's recorded voice said, "then I'm dead and Parallax has moved forward." Hale leaned closer. The general's expression on the screen was grim, resolute. They've been building it for years. Care was a pawn, brilliant but arrogant. He was never meant to lead, just to prove it could be done. The real architects are deeper, colder, hidden under layers of funding, treaties, and lies. You know some of them already. You just don't know who's wearing which face. The screen flickered. Temple's image blurred, then returned. I left this drive behind in case the board pushed the Reaper protocol too far. You were supposed to be a stopgap, a legend to scare the monsters back into the dark, but legends don't stay still forever. They evolve. And so must you. The general leaned forward in the video. His eyes seemed to pierce the screen. There's a name. You'll find it hidden in the failed records. Look for the erased missions, the ones marked A0. There you'll find the first Reaper, the real one. The feed cut to static. Hale stared at the screen. No replay, no file saved, just those last haunting words. The first Reaper. Hale sat back in the snow, the weight of it hitting him like a punch. He'd always believed he was the first, the only, born from blood and necessity, made to be a myth. But if Temple was right, and Hale knew he was, then someone had worn the mantle before him. And if they were still alive, then maybe this wasn't just about care. Maybe this was a war that had been looping in secret, eating its own tail for decades. He dug through the data Temple had buried in the corrupted files, erased missions, names with black bars through them, coordinates with just enough left behind to guess. It took hours, but eventually one stuck out. Operation A0R, Resolute, Antarctica, 1989. Deemed a weather anomaly investigation. 17 operatives sent in. None returned. Mission status purged. Hale copied the coordinates, burned the drive, then disappeared into the trees. He caught a cargo flight south using papers from an old ghost ID buried in a forgotten CIA ledger. From there, he bribed his way onto a research vessel bound for McMurdo Station. It took weeks. Ice broke beneath them like thunder. Men got frostbite just walking the deck. But Hale never flinched. When they arrived, he didn't check in, didn't shake hands or offer a story. He just slipped past the noise, found an abandoned snowcat left out to rust, hot-wired it, and headed inland. The wind clawed at the vehicle like it wanted him gone. Visibility dropped to 10 feet. The GPS lost signal. But Hale wasn't following signals anymore. He was following instinct. When the storm broke, he saw it. Buried in the ice. A structure not on any map. Black. Geometric. Angled like it had been designed by a machine. Half buried, but humming. Alive. He approached slowly, every step crunching louder than it should. He placed a hand on the door. It didn't open. It folded inward, seamless, silent, and warm. Inside, the air shifted, artificial, recycled. The hallway lit itself. Hale walked forward without hesitation. The hallway turned to an atrium, and there, at the center of it all, sat a chair. Not a throne, not a command station, just a simple chair, and in it, a man, or what was left of one. He was pale, hooked to tubes, skin like wax. But his eyes opened the moment Hale stepped inside. "You're late," the man rasped. Hale froze. "You're Reaper 1. "I was," the man coughed. "Now I'm just memory." Hale stepped closer, took in the details. The same uniform, old but unmistakable. The same insignia he thought had started with him. "Who did this to you?" he asked. The man didn't answer, just looked up at the ceiling. "They made me a prototype. Flesh fused with code. Said I was too human to finish the mission." "Who's they?" "The ones who own Parallax. The ones who own everything." Hale leaned in. "Name them." The man laughed. It was a hollow sound. "You wouldn't recognize them, but they'll recognize you. You've made too much noise. They'll come, not to kill you, to use you. Let them try. They already are." The lights dimmed. The walls hummed. The man's head slumped forward. Gone. Hale stood there for a long time, silent. Then reached into the back of the chair and pulled a small data core. It was labeled with a single phrase, Reaper 0. He pocketed it and walked out. The snow had returned. The storm swallowed the entrance behind him like it had never been there. But Hale didn't stop. He had what he came for, and now he had proof. Reaper was never a man. It was a sequence, a legacy, a weapon built to evolve itself over time through blood, memory, and sacrifice. And he was next in line. But not to become it, to end it. Because legends don't rule the world, they burn it. And Hale was done being a myth. 3 weeks later, Hale stood in a glass elevator inside one of the tallest buildings in Zurich, dressed in a suit that didn't quite hide the weight he carried. His hair was slicked back, beard trimmed, posture too perfect for someone meant to blend in. The city pulsed beneath him, all light and illusion. Reflected wealth, manufactured peace. But up here, at the very top, was where the real war had always lived. Corporate seats of power disguised as finance firms, tech giants posing as humanitarians, billion-dollar nonprofits funneling cash into the kinds of programs that built people like CARE and erased people like Temple. At the top floor, the doors opened to silence. Thick carpet, frosted windows, no secretary, just a long hallway and a door at the end made of solid oak. Hale walked it slow, deliberate. He didn't knock. He just turned the handle and stepped inside. The man behind the desk didn't look surprised. Of course he didn't. He had been expecting this. "Mr. Hale," he said without standing, or should I say, Reaper? Hale said nothing. The man smiled. He looked like a banker, plain, average, but too average. His features so generic they felt engineered. "You've caused quite the mess," the man continued. "Syria, Moldova, the Baltic burn, and now you've gone and dug up Reaper Zero." Hale stepped forward. "You're going to give me names." "We already gave you yours." "I'm not asking. You don't need to ask. You already know." Hale reached into his coat. The man raised a hand, not in fear, but like he was trying to stop a child from making a mistake. "You think this ends with me? This is a hydra, Mr. Hale. Cut off one head and 2 more take its place. You should have stayed dead in that valley. Should have kept patching holes and playing ghost." Hale dropped the drive marked Reaper Zero onto the desk. It landed with a dull thunk. "I know about Parallax, about the funding, about the failed prototypes. I know this building runs 17 shell corporations tied to black site R&D. I know you funded CARE. I know you lost control of him." The man's smile didn't move. "We didn't lose control. We let him run. We needed to see how far he'd go. And now? Now we move on to phase 3. Not if I burn this place down first." The man finally leaned forward, folding his hands. "And what then? You expose us? To who? The governments that we bankroll? The public that can't tell the difference between truth and fiction? You are a myth, Mr. Hale. A story soldiers whisper at night. You're already the thing people say isn't real. That's your power and your prison. Then maybe it's time I became real. You won't survive it." Hale's eyes didn't blink. "I don't need to." He turned, walked to the window, looked down at the city beneath him. "You ever hear the phrase, 'kill the shepherd'? Biblical, isn't it?" "No, practical." Hale reached into his coat again, pulled out a phone, pressed one button. "What did you just do?" the man asked. Hale didn't answer, but the city lights began to flicker, one by one, whole blocks going dark. Not power outages, surges, controlled blackouts, systems shutting down in synchronized waves, traffic cams, surveillance nodes, emergency frequencies. "What is this?" the man demanded. "It's called a kill switch," Hale said. "Temple built it into the original Reaper framework, just in case." The man stood now, furious. "You're bluffing." Hale tossed the phone onto the desk. "You'll find out in about 30 seconds. You'll die for this. I was supposed to die a long time ago." Sirens wailed outside, far off at first, then closer, then too close to be ignored. The man backed up, eyes darting. You don't have proof, you don't have a face, you're a ghost. Nothing you do will stick." Hale looked at him one last time. "Then let's haunt you properly." He left, walked out the same door, down the elevator, into the chaos blooming below, power grid collapsing, data centers melting, every Reaper file ever written being purged or published, depending on what temple had built into the switch. Either way, the age of silence was ending. The next morning, the headlines were chaos. Global data breach exposes undisclosed military bioweapon program. Secret operatives called Reapers linked to human testing. Ghost medic or myth. Footage surfaces of unidentified agent at top-secret facilities. Governments denied everything. Agencies scrambled. Corporations went into crisis control. And somewhere in a dark room, in a darker building, a committee assembled. 11 men and women, all faceless, all silent, until one finally spoke. "He knows everything." Another nodded. "Then we call him. He's not supposed to be active. He's not supposed to exist. Neither is the Reaper protocol." A pause. Then a single phrase. "Call Obsidian." Somewhere else, far beyond the reach of satellites or truth, a man woke up. His eyes opened. His breath even. His pulse steady. The final countermeasure had been triggered. And now, Reaper wasn't the only myth walking the earth. The safe house in Vienna had been untouched for years. It was tucked between two bookstores on a narrow street that never made it onto tourist maps. Hale moved through the coded entry sequence by muscle memory, each keystroke embedded in the skin of his fingers. Inside, it was exactly as he remembered. Cold, bare, functional. He peeled off the suit, changed into darker gear, and moved to the small steel case embedded in the floor beneath the bed. He opened it. Inside was a single file folder and a revolver wrapped in oiled cloth. The folder was labeled Phoenix Stone. Hale flipped it open. It wasn't a location. It was a code name, a protocol even older than the Reaper Initiative. One temple had mentioned once during a late night in Kandahar, half drunk and fully haunted. "If Reaper ever breaks containment," he'd had said, "Stone gets lifted." Hale hadn't asked what that meant then. He regretted that now. The file contained a list, not names, coordinates, dots on a map scattered like shrapnel across the globe, black site remnants, fail-safe caches, each one designed to either restart the program or bury it permanently. Hale knew which option he was choosing. He plotted a route. Fastest hit order, 6 locations, 1 week. Then Stone would be done. Then Reaper could finally end. The first stop was outside Marrakesh, an abandoned textile plant above what was once a training center for embedded assets. Hale found the elevator shaft buried beneath crushed looms and sandbags. He rappelled down without hesitation. The base was dead, long cold, but the console at the far end still blinked faintly. The message was simple. "Stone Node 1, inactive, awaiting trigger." Hale inserted Temple's coin, the one he'd given Mila. The system accepted it. The console lit green. Confirmed termination of Phoenix Stone. He did. The lights shut down for good. Next was the Arctic Node, a listening post camouflaged as a meteorology research station. He arrived under cover of aurora and cloud. The few researchers still stationed there never even knew he passed through. The node was behind the boiler room, protected by biometric redundancy. Hale bypassed with an algorithm Temple had once scribbled on a whiskey label. Stone Node 2. Termination confirmed. 4 more, each buried under layers of paranoia and precision. By the time Hale reached the last, in a long-dead vault beneath Hong Kong, he was running on adrenaline and instinct. The walls of the final chamber were lined with monitors, screens showing the Reaper line. Not names, not faces, just silhouettes, movements, Combat footage, medical logs, every mission he'd been told was erased. All of it here, preserved, cataloged, watched, including footage of himself. There he was on the screen, dragging Keller through sniper fire, resetting Granger's shoulder, administering morphine with one hand while firing with the other. It wasn't surveillance. It was admiration, worship. Someone had turned the Reaper into doctrine. The screen blinked once. A voice, synthetic and layered, came through the chamber. Final node detected. Reaper Hale, you have terminated all stone protocols. Do you wish to proceed to the final directive? Hale stared at the screen. His reflection shimmered back at him. Hollow eyes. A soldier who had outlived his orders. Yes, he said. Execute final directive. The chamber whirred. Somewhere deep underground, a core melted. Drives were purged. Entire systems fried. The monitors blinked out. Silence returned. Then came the whisper. Not synthetic. Not recorded. A real voice, hidden in a speaker just behind him. Female. Familiar. I knew you'd finish it, she said. Hale turned. Nothing. No one. But he recognized the voice. Mila. The voice vanished like smoke, but the echo of it lingered. Hale scanned the chamber again, checked for active comms, sensors, anything that might have relayed a signal. Nothing. No heat signature. No audio spike. Just his name, spoken in the voice of a girl he'd once carried out of hell and hidden from the world. He stepped closer to the wall where the voice had come from. The panel was smooth, cold. Then he saw it, etched faintly into the surface, almost invisible without the right angle of light, a small inscription, Mila 2. He pressed his fingers to it. It didn't open, didn't blink, but he felt a pulse beneath it, as if something had heard him or was waiting. A second later, a new message appeared on the only monitor still functioning. Backup unit active. Location unknown. Controlled by Obsidian. Hale's jaw tightened. Obsidian. The counterweight. The one they called when Reaper went rogue. He thought they were a myth. A bedtime story for people like him. But now the stories were waking up. He took the train north under an alias last used during a black site extraction in Argentina. A slow ride through cities he didn't stop to remember. By the time he reached Dresden, it was raining hard enough to mask his steps and cold enough to remind him he was still alive. He checked into a motel that charged by the hour and asked no questions. Inside, he cracked open a secure laptop tied to a ghost satellite uplink. Typed one phrase, Obsidian sighting confirmed. Mission status unresolved. The reply came faster than he expected. Triangulation initiated. Intercept possible. Then coordinates. A timestamp. No sender name. Just the symbol. The hourglass again. The meeting point was an old cathedral outside Krakow, abandoned since the Cold War and rumored to have once housed Soviet deep tech research. Hale arrived 3 hours early, watched the approach vectors, laid down sensors. He wasn't going in blind, not this time. He entered through a collapsed side window, boots silent on the broken tile. The altar had been stripped, the pews gutted, only dust and data remained, but someone was already there. A figure stood in the center of the room, facing away from him, still, waiting. Not Mila, taller, broader shoulders, clad in dark tactical gear with no insignia, no patch, no nation. Hale didn't speak, just circled, slow, until the face was visible. The man turned, young, too young, but his eyes, dead, cold. They sent you, Hale said. The man nodded. They activated me the moment Stone shut down. Your signature triggered the alert. And what are you? Your end. Hale drew, fast. The man didn't flinch, didn't reach for a weapon. He just blinked and vanished. Not stepped back, not ducked, vanished. Reappeared behind Hale, a whisper too close. Hale spun, blocked, countered. But the man wasn't there anymore. He was 10 feet away, then 5, then 1. It wasn't teleportation, it was prediction, preemptive movement. Hale adjusted, shifted to improvisational combat, what Temple used to call the broken line. It slowed the man, gave him hesitation, enough for Hale to land a punch that cracked ribs. The man staggered, coughed, spat blood, and smiled. "You're better than the file said." "I'm worse," Hale growled. He dropped low, swept the legs, pinned the man. "Where's Mila?" The man blinked. "Which one?" Hale's blood went cold. "You're lying. She was the prototype for their next-gen empathy loop, the only model with residual conscience. But she ran, just like you. Now she's the virus, and viruses get erased." Hale struck again, hard, but the man just grinned. "You're too late. She's already activated." The cathedral lit up in red. Sirens, motion sensors. Tactical drones dropped from hidden ports in the ceiling. Hale rolled off his opponent just as the floor beneath them erupted in sound. The other man was already moving, backflipping over pews, sliding behind cover. Hale didn't chase. He activated his jammer, scrambled the drones, disabled 2 with shots to the sensors. The rest closed in. Fast. Efficient. He leapt through the shattered stained glass window, tumbled onto the grass, and kept running. The drones followed. But not for long. A magnetic pulse hit them mid-air. They dropped like stones. Hale looked up. She stood in the fog. Mila. But older, hardened. Still real. Still her. She hadn't changed much. Not really. A few more lines around the eyes, a tighter set to the jaw. Her frame was leaner, quicker, trained for the kind of fight she'd once only escaped from. But it was her, not a clone, not a projection. Hale knew the difference. He stepped forward slow, careful. "How?" he asked. "How did you survive?" Mila's eyes never left his. "You taught me how to disappear." Her voice wasn't cold. It wasn't warm either, just steady. "They found me a year after you left me with Vika. Said they needed me for research, for closure. I knew what it meant." Hale nodded. He'd warned her in his own way, but she'd still been a kid. A brilliant one, yes, but young. "So I ran," she continued. "Used the coin, cracked the hidden lines in Temple's file. That's when I found out what I was." Hale's jaw clenched. "You were never a weapon." "No, I was a test. They modeled the entire empathy control AI on me. I was the control variable in a lab full of monsters." She walked past him toward the trees. "And now they've activated the others." Hale followed. The 2 of them moved without speaking, ducking through the fog until they reached a clearing where she'd stashed a stolen recon bike. She tossed him a helmet. "You're going to want to see this." They rode for over an hour through wooded hills and broken infrastructure. At one point, they passed an old Soviet checkpoint half swallowed by vines. Mila's hand flicked to her belt, and Hale watched as a signal jammer blinked off and on in her palm. She was already operating like an operative. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he hated that. They finally stopped at an overlook above what once had been a radar facility. Concrete domes collapsed in on themselves, rusted towers leaning like drunken giants, but the dome at the center still pulsed with blue light. "That's where the signal's coming from," Mila said. "The pulse that activated the Obsidian unit." "How do you know?" "Because I wrote the code." Hale turned. "You what?" Mila didn't flinch. "They made me build it. Before I ran. I buried a trigger, a final fail-safe, in case they turned it on me, or you. And what does it do?" "It wakes them up, but if we overload it, we put them back to sleep." Mila nodded. They descended on foot, no headlights, no drones. Hale still preferred to work by instinct. That hadn't changed. They moved like ghosts through the ruins, bypassing motion sensors Mila had scrambled using a looped thermal feed. Inside the central dome, it was colder than the ice fields he'd crawled through months before. Rows of tanks lined the walls, some empty, some sealed. Human silhouettes floated in the liquid, suspended like memories. "They called it the Chorus," Mila whispered. "A synchronized unit of Reaper hybrids. Not soldiers, not AI, just bodies designed to obey." Hale stepped forward. The nearest pod held a young man, barely 20, identical uniform, identical scars. His eyes were open, watching. "He's awake." Mila nodded. "They all are. The pulse just keeps them still." Hale's fingers hovered over the release valve. "If we shut it down, they break free. Unless we overload the sync command first, flood it with emotion the code can't process." Hale stared at her. "You're talking about breaking the thing you were designed to protect. That's why I'm the only one who can do it." She moved to the central console. Hale covered her, rifle steady. The pod units began to hum. Heart rate spiked. Biosignals surged. Mila's fingers flew across the console. "We've got about 30 seconds before the system realizes it's been compromised. And if it does, it'll initiate purge protocol, full biotermination of all units, including me." Hale didn't hesitate. "Then we don't let it get that far." The dome shook. Lights flared. The pod nearest him cracked. Hale raised his weapon, then stopped. Inside, the soldier was smiling, a slow, unnatural curl of the lips. "Too late," the soldier whispered. "She's already infected the loop," Mila screamed, not out loud, in code. The console surged, her eyes rolled back, hands twitching, caught in the feedback loop. Hale rushed to her, grabbed her shoulders. "Mila, look at me." She shuddered. "I can't shut it down. It's inside me now. They used my mind as the key, and now it's rewriting me." "Fight it." "I'm trying." "Then stop thinking like a system." He pressed his forehead to hers. "You're not a Reaper. You're Mila. You remember the rain on the roof, the old man who gave us bread in Moldova, the way the city lit up when we crossed the bridge? You remember me," she gasped, shuddered again. "Nathan." The hum silenced. One by one the tank shut down. The light dimmed, and Mila collapsed in his arms. He held her, pulse still racing, her breath shallow but even. The console screen blinked once, a single line of text. "Corruption neutralized, Chorus offline." Hale exhaled, long, slow, then looked at her. "You came back." "I never left," she whispered. They didn't leave through the front. Hale knew better than to use the same path twice. He carried Mila over his shoulder at first, light, too light, but breathing steady. By the time they cleared the ridge above the facility, she stirred. "I can walk," she murmured, voice thin but lucid. He didn't argue. He just set her down gently and adjusted his pace to match hers. They disappeared into the woods, and by the time Obsidian reinforcements arrived at the ruins of the Chorus facility, they found only silence and power failure. No signatures, no heat trails, just the remains of a program that had finally burned itself out. For the next 5 days, Hale and Mila moved like shadows across the edge of Europe. Unmarked roads, safe houses buried under false passports, and rusted keys. Mila slept in bursts, her system still purging corrupted strands of neural data, twitches in her hands, migraines that struck like thunder. Hale kept watch. Always. When she finally spoke again, really spoke, it was somewhere along the Danube, in a flat above a closed train station. The windows were blacked out, the lights dim. "They built Chorus from my childhood memories," she said. Hale looked up from the map he'd been studying. "Say that again." Mila sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on her knees. "They ran me through echo simulations for years, probed my long-term memory. Every laugh, every scream, every time you told me I'd be okay. They used that to stabilize the empathy field, made the Reaper units dream of me." Her voice caught. "I'm their ghost, Nathan. I'm the face in their mind when they pull the trigger, the ghost that makes them human enough to follow orders." Hale didn't move. "And now that you're free, they'll come after me. Or worse, use someone else. They've already started. She reached into her jacket, pulled out a strip of synth skin. Embedded in the flesh was a microchip, one Hale had seen once, long ago, in the chest of a boy who'd tried to stab him in Moldova. "This was keyed to my signature," she whispered. "It doesn't belong to me anymore." Hale took it, turned it over once in his palm, then crushed it in his fist. That night they burned every device in the apartment. Phones, drives, compasses. They pulled the circuits from the walls, boiled the SIMs, dismantled the backboards. Hale set fire to the map. Mila poured acid on the remaining coin. "We vanish," she said. Hale nodded. "For now." But they both knew better. They'd cut the throat of the system, not the spine. On the 6th day, Mila took him to a graveyard outside Prague. "You said you buried something here once," she murmured. "I did." They found it in the far northeast corner, beneath a nameless headstone. Hale knelt, fingers brushing the frost off the stone's surface. Then he dug. 6 inches down, wrapped in a cloth soaked in age and earth, was the gun. Harrow. His original. The one from Red Sky. The one he hadn't seen since Temple's death. "I thought it was destroyed," Mila said. "So did I." Hale unwrapped it slowly. The metal was dull, weathered, but intact. Etched in the grip were 4 digits, 2270, Echo Company's last classified deployment. Beneath that the words, "Never the first, never the last." "Temple told me once that Reaper was just a title," Hale said. "A story passed on to the next one, foolish enough to believe it could end. And do you still believe that?" He checked the chamber, full, clean, ready. "No," he said. "I'm going to bury the story with me." They made their way south after that, crossed into the Balkans under night. They didn't talk much, not out loud. But a rhythm grew between them, trust without burden, direction without certainty. Somewhere deep in the mountains, Mila stopped. "There's a man," she said, "still active, off-grid, one of the architects. He used to work for Temple before Parallax got to him." "How do you know?" "Because he was the one who got me out." Hale studied her face. "Why didn't you tell me before?" "Because I didn't trust him, and I didn't want to give you hope." Hale nodded slowly. "Where is he?" Mila looked up at the mountains, already waiting. They found him in a hollowed-out monastery perched between 2 cliffs, reachable only by a narrow pass and a sheer climb Hale insisted on doing without gear. The man had been waiting. His silhouette stood framed by candlelight in a chapel long since gutted by war and time. He was older, 60s at least, but he moved like someone who'd survived the kind of decades that didn't make the history books. Mila kept her hand close to her belt, where she'd hidden a field knife. Hale didn't blame her. The man stepped forward, one palm open in greeting, the other holding a glass of something dark and strong. "Reaper," he said softly. "Or would you prefer Nathan?" Hale didn't respond. "You're a hard man to find," the old one continued. "I expected you days ago." "Got delayed by your cleanup crew in Krakow," Hale said. "I assume you know they're dead?" "They weren't mine. Not anymore." "Then who do you answer to?" "Same people you used to, just a layer deeper, a floor lower than command ever told you existed." Hale stepped closer. "You're one of the architects." "I was." "What changed?" The man sipped his drink. "Temple died." The name landed heavy in the space between them. Hale didn't blink. "You knew?" "He was the only one of us who still believed in the human part of the program. When they turned him into a liability, I knew what was coming." "Why help Mila?" "Because she's proof the machine breaks, that we can still build something that doesn't end in fire and silence." Mila watched silently from the shadows, her jaw set. "What do you want?" Hale asked. "Nothing, except to show you something before they kill me, too." He turned and walked toward the back of the chapel. They followed. Behind the altar was a hatch, old, reinforced, a key code lock with dust still clinging to the corners. The man entered a 6-digit sequence, 031794. Mila caught the numbers. "Temple's daughter's birthday," she whispered. The hatch hissed, opened. They descended into darkness. The bunker below was a single room, sealed, humid. A glow emanated from one wall, servers still operational, tied to no grid, no network, no traceable link. The man pointed to the center terminal. Everything they built. Every version of Reaper, Chorus, Obsidian, all of it, it's in there. Every name they erased. Every mission they rewrote, even yours. Hale stepped forward, scrolled through the files. Dozens of redacted reports flashed by. He opened one. Operation Resolute. His first black mission, the one they told him never existed. Photos, satellite captures, combat logs, all of it was here. So were the others. Echo Company dossiers, videos of Temple authorizing protocols he'd sworn never happened. Even footage of Mila in the lab, early footage, before she was even aware the cameras were running. "Why keep this?" Hale asked. "Insurance." Against what? The truth, the kind no one wants to admit. The old man leaned heavily on the desk. Reaper wasn't just a protocol. It was a filter, a way to find out which soldiers would go too far and which ones would go far enough. You passed, Nathan. You were the only one who passed. And Mila? She was the fix, the counterweight. You destroy. She restores. She was supposed to make you human again. Hale looked back at her. Her expression was unreadable. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now?" the man said. "You decide. You can take the drive and vanish. Or you can upload it all." "To who?" "Everyone. The whole world." "You think truth matters anymore?" "I think it's the only weapon you haven't used yet." Hale stared at the screen, at the blinking prompt. "Export all files Y and N?" Mila stepped beside him. For once, she didn't look like someone made in a lab. She looked like a person. Tired, angry, whole. "What if we give them everything?" she asked. Hale didn't answer. He just pressed Y. The servers groaned. Lights flickered. Above them, the chapel rumbled. The signal burst through hidden satellites Temple had buried years before. It cracked firewalls, rerouted through civilian networks, burst into inboxes and newsrooms and subreddits and archives. The truth had no name, but it had weight. Reaper, Chorus, Obsidian, Parallax. The ghost stories turned into data. The data turned into headlines. By nightfall, the world burned again, but not with bombs, with questions. Governments denied everything within hours. Of course they did. Ministries of defense from every continent held emergency press conferences, spitting out the same scripted denials. No knowledge of such programs. Images appear fabricated. Investigation underway. But the internet never sleeps. And this time the flood was too wide to stop. Millions of files, audio logs, combat footage, internal memos, AI blueprints, neural architecture drafts, all released in a synchronized burst Hale had triggered from the old bunker. It wasn't just the Reaper project. It was the entire web of control behind it. Names, funding trails, offshore accounts, private labs. The truth bled out faster than they could cauterize it. Hale and Mila watched from a safe house in the back hills of Croatia, an old stone cottage Temple had once called his final fallback. No electricity, no Wi-Fi, just a portable satellite monitor they powered by hand crank and a radio that could only receive, not transmit. By the third day, protests had started, not just in the usual places, everywhere. Seoul, Stockholm, Lagos, Chicago. A coalition of truth-hungry chaos. Former soldiers came forward with stories they'd been too afraid to tell. Scientists leaked even more data. A whistleblower from one of the shell companies linked to Chorus published the original Reaper behavioral templates. Hale's name was all over them, but only as Specimen A-15. It wasn't until the footage surfaced, the real footage, uncut and unfiltered, that the world realized the ghost had a face. One clip in particular went viral. Hale dragging a wounded soldier through a firefight, blood streaking across his chest, his mouth moving through smoke and bullets as he whispered, "You hold on. You hold on. I've got you." It was grainy, shaky, but real. In 10 hours, it had 70 million views. Mila sat beside him, watching the numbers climb. "You're not a ghost anymore," she said. Hale didn't answer. "They know who you are." "They know a name," he said finally. "Not the man who used it." Mila watched him for a long time. "Do you even know any more?" Hale didn't blink. "I know what I've done. That's enough." On the 5th night, the safe house perimeter alert chirped once. Hale stood before it finished, grabbed Harrow from the footlocker, checked the chamber, and moved to the window. 3 silhouettes, coming up slow, too clean, too quiet. Not journalists, not protesters, not survivors. Obsidian. He turned to Mila. "Downstairs, Tunnel Route 7. I'm not leaving you. I'm not asking. If they take you, then we lose." Hale didn't argue, just handed her a flare case from the supply bin. "If I drop, light it. Full signal, burn every fallback we have." Mila nodded. They didn't say goodbye. The first man breached the west wall with a pulse grenade that shattered the doorframe in a single hum. Hale shot him before the second step. The body hit the stone floor with a grunt and a soft hiss, neural dampeners sizzling as the shock registered across his spinal rig. The second came through the window. Hale tackled him midair, slammed him into the stone, twisted until bones cracked and the scream died in the man's throat. The third was smarter. He waited. Hale circled once, caught the glint of a scope hidden behind the old fountain ruins. He rolled left just as the bullet missed his head by a breath, fired twice. One shot took the scope, the other hit metal, body armor, but it dropped the shooter long enough for Hale to move. He reached the ridge above the cottage in 15 seconds. The sniper was gone. Just a trail of blood and a single round left behind. Hale picked it up, standard issue, obsidian mark, but something was etched into the side, a number. 47. "Another Reaper," Hale muttered. But this one wasn't him, and 47 was far from the end. Back in the tunnel, Mila waited by the emergency access ladder. "What happened? They sent another version. Another clone? No, a recruit, one of the new ones. You sure?" Hale showed her the bullet. "I used to mark mine the same way." Mila exhaled. "That's not good." "No, but it tells us something." "What?" "Obsidian's out of time. If they're deploying versions this sloppy, it means they're reacting, not controlling." They moved again, further south, past the lines of the known maps, into villages that didn't have names, only stories. Hale didn't check the news anymore. It didn't matter what they said. It mattered what came next, what would rise from the ashes of the myth he'd just dismantled. Reaper wasn't a man anymore. It wasn't even a legend. It was a signal, a proof of concept. And now that signal was out in the wild, echoed, studied, copied, rewritten. "You think they'll try again?" Mila asked as they walked through an olive grove that hadn't seen war in 50 years. Hale nodded once. "They don't know how to stop. Then we don't either." Hale looked up at the stars, quiet, cold, indifferent. "No," he said, "we don't."